Kouichi just moved from the big city of Tokyo to the small town of Yomiyama. At first, everything at his new school, Yomiyama North Junior High, seemed normal. But he soon learns the classroom he joined has a mysterious curse, causing the students to die tragically one after another throughout the school year. So he must team up with his newfound friends to find a way to end the curse before it claims everyone. "How do you feel? Are you in pain?" asks the grandmother of Kouichi as he wakes up from his hospital bed. Kouichi says he's fine and that he'll tell his father about his collapsed lung later, since he's busy working in India. And we both see his grandmother and his aunt, Reiko, as they stare at the small country city of Yomiyama. But more importantly, Yomiyama North Junior High, where both Kouichi's deceased mother and aunt had attended during their middle school days. Later, 3 visitors from his class appear: Tomo, Yukari, and Izumi, who are all representatives of Class 3. Izumi knows he moved here from Tokyo and asks if he's lived here before, but he only visited when he was little and never really stayed in Yomiyama for long. Izumi then offers a welcome handshake, and upon touching hands, the room becomes silent as Izumi asks him if he's sure he's never lived here before. Sometime after, he steps outside his room to make a phone call to his dad, and behind him appears a mysterious girl with an eye patch. The two stand apart in an eerie silence as the elevator descends, and upon seeing her uniform, he asks if she's also a student at Yomi North, to which she nods to. The floor approaches basement level 2, and Kouichi asks if she has business here. The girl then responds she must deliver something to her poor other half. Kouichi notices the doll in her hand, and as she walks into the dark hall, he asks what her name is. She utters, "May Misaki," then walks towards the dark hall leading to the morgue. The next morning, Kouichi gets awakened by a phone call from his father. His father wishes him good luck on his first day of school, and not to get too bent up on the collapsed lung, as he also had it twice when he was young and then never again. He then tells Kouichi to say hi to his grandparents for him, and then the call drops. Kouichi then sits down and reflects on how his aunt Reiko told him that at Yomi North, he must always uphold the rules. At school, Kouichi is finally able to introduce himself in front of his class, and when he sits down, he notices May in the corner on the window side. After class, the students converse with Kouichi to get to know him better, but he for some reason can only fixate on May's desk. Tomo then offers to show Kouichi around the school, since their class rep Izumi is absent for the day. After the school tour, Yukari meets with Kouichi during PE class. As they look at the students, Kouichi wonders why their class doesn't share PE with any of the other classes. Yukari tells him 1 and 2, 4 and 5 all share PE together, but Class 3 is different and doesn't share any class time with other classes. Aside from the strangeness of their class dynamic, something else had been bothering Kouichi for a while. He asks where May is, causing Yukari to become wide-eyed, but then she asks him who that is. We then hear stormy clouds and see May on top of the roof. Kouichi heads up there to see her drawing and asks her what she's doing up here instead of in class with them. May responds, "I don't know," then asks Kouichi why he's up here, but he doesn't really know either. She then wonders if his classmates had told him about it yet, and wonders what it she's referring to. And we learn his name is associated with death, a cruel, gruesome one, and that this school is in a place close to death, especially for those in Class 3. May then tells him not to get close to her, and that they shouldn't talk ever again. But this doesn't stop him from approaching her the next day. As an ominous wind blows the petals around them, she tells him to be careful, as it may have already begun. We then transition to Class 3 enjoying their time in art class, and Yuya asks what Kouichi thinks of Mikami-sensei, as all the boys think she's hot. Kouichi isn't really sure how to feel about that. After class, as the two boys walk down the hall, Yuya begins staring at the window, saying how uneasy he and everyone else feels here at the school. But then, Naoya comes in, wanting to join in on the conversation. However, this conversation is broken immediately when Kouichi notices May in the library by herself. He walks over to greet her, and May wonders why the other students didn't stop him. Kouichi asks about the eye patch, but they get interrupted by the school bell and the librarian, Chibiki-sensei, telling him to head to class, but he's welcome here anytime. Later that night, Kouichi enters the hospital and sits down with Nurse Sanai to ask if a girl with an eye patch had died last Monday, when he was still admitted here at the hospital. Sanai remembers something about a young patient passing away and offers to find out more information for him, in exchange for the reason he wants to know later. The next day in class, the teacher is giving a lesson in haikus, but once again, the only thing Kouichi can fixate on is Mei's desk. He looks away to see Izumi glaring at him and wonders if something is wrong. With you for not liking the video or subscribing to my channel yet. Oh wait, you have? Well, good, because here at My Shoujo Weekly, I've got plenty of interesting stories for you. Usually I cover romance, drama, and villainous, but this time I felt like a little horror. I also live stream weekly where we touch on some of the most exciting stories in gaming you won't want to miss. So hit that subscribe and join me live. After school, Izumi asks if he's got time to chat, where she questions him again if he's ever lived here in Yomiyama. Kouichi responds that he was born at the Yomiyama hospital and that his mother passed away right after his birth. But again, he lived in Tokyo for most of his life. Even with that response, however, Izumi couldn't help but feel that she's met him before somewhere and is annoyed that she can't remember where from clearly. She then explains she's the class rep and head of countermeasures, which is a position dedicated to devising plans to protect Class 3. Mei walks by, and Kouichi follows her, causing Izumi to clench her teeth in anger for some reason. Kouichi trails Mei until he loses her at a split path. He continues until he notices a doll shop. He suddenly gets a call from Nurse Sanai, and she confirms that a junior high girl had died that night he was at the hospital. Kouichi becomes wide-eyed in shock as he hears the girl's name was Misaki. But the line cuts off because of the bad reception. Kouichi decides to enter the doll shop, and the owner says he can take his time looking around, as she has no other customers. Kouichi observes the uncanny-looking dolls a bit, and walks down towards a basement area. As he enters the basement floor, he becomes astonished to see a doll that resembles May Misaki. He asks why she's here, and then suddenly hears Mei ask if he likes this sort of thing. She then asks why he's here, and appears from behind the doll. She wasn't trying to surprise him, he just happened to be here while she was looking around. She then asks Kouichi if he thinks the doll looks like her. Kouichi believes it does, and Mei remarks it could only look like half of her, as she touches the doll's covered eye. She then asks if she should show him what's under her eye patch, as she slowly pulls it off. Underneath is a small prosthetic one, the same as the doll's eye. It can see things that should remain unseen, which is why she usually keeps it covered. The two conversate upstairs, and we learn the doll artist works in a studio above them. Kouichi thinks of the call he had earlier where Nurse Sanai told him of the dead girl with the name Misaki, and this causes Kouichi to ask if Mei has any sisters. She shakes her head no, causing him to swallow in nervousness. Then he thinks of when the shop owner said she had no other customers. Mei then asks if he has anything to ask her, and Kouichi remarks there are a few things that seem strange to him. Mei then explains the old legend in this town of Class 3 from 26 years ago. There was once a popular student who everyone liked that had died sometime after starting the 9th grade. They were running theories of her death, such as in a plane crash or car accident, but no one in their class really knew how she died. Regardless, everyone in the girls' class had become terribly shocked and stricken with grief, until one day, a student had said she wasn't dead, while pointing at her desk, saying she was alive and well. The other students started to all join in, saying, "It's true, she's not dead," as none of them were willing to accept the harsh reality. Even the teacher went along with it, saying the class should continue to work hard as a team. Then, after graduation, everyone gathered in for a class photo. They noticed they could still see the girl who should have been dead, with a deathly pale face, but a smile like all the other students had. The student also had the name Misaki. The shop owner then tells Kouichi it's closing time, and when he gets up to look around, he sees May Misaki nowhere to be found. The next day, the boys stare at their class exam dates, while talking about where they'll go to high school in the future. Tomo and Naoya talk about how they've known each other since the 2nd grade, and how they grew up as neighbors. Tomo playfully remarks the two of them are stuck together. They ask where Kouichi will go to high school, and with his dad coming back next year, He'll probably go back to Tokyo for private school. After school, Kouichi stares at the rain, and Yukari asks if he'd like to walk home with her. The two head out, and while grabbing his shoes, he then asks her what May is like. Yukari stops at the exit and starts to hyperventilate before telling Kouichi to never speak her name in Class 3. Naoya walks by them and Kouichi asks about the Class 3 incident that occurred 26 years ago. He mentions the photo, then Mikami-sensei appears to tell him that the subject is a sensitive issue and that everyone should not speak about it for now. Later at home, Aunt Reiko sits down exhausted from work. Kouichi asks if she remembers which 9th grade class his mother was in, and she gives a concerned look on her face before answering no. She stares into the void before he asks about the Class 3 incident from 26 years ago. He asks if she knows about it, and she gets up to tell him not to take the story too seriously before leaving to say his mother was also in Class 3. The next day at school, as Kouichi walks with Tomo, he notices May on top of the school roof again. He goes to meet her, and suddenly gets a call from Naoya saying Izumi is going to be angry. The phone begins to cut out due to bad reception, but Naoya is able to utter the words, "Don't mess with things that don't exist." The call drops, and later at home, Kouichi gets a call from the nurse and learns the girl who had died earlier was named Misaki Fujioka. And Kouichi is glad it isn't May, but is now only left with more questions than before. The next day in class, he finishes his exam early and sees May outside the class who had also finished early like he did. He mentions Misaki Fujioka to May, and she explains that Misaki was her cousin that she used to play with all the time. Kouichi then asks why everyone in their class acts like she doesn't exist, and she interjects to say, "Because I don't exist," causing Kouichi to hyperventilate. She then says none of the others can see her, and poses the idea that he's the only one that could see her, causing Kouichi to think about all the moments he'd seen her, staring in disbelief from her statement. Then, Yukari gets pulled out of class by another teacher and grabs an umbrella. When she walks towards Kouichi, she suddenly stops with a fearful look and then runs the opposite way. She then heads towards the other staircase, and when running down, she trips, and Kouichi stares completely sick at the horrible sight of the umbrella that had impaled her. Later in the hospital, Nurse Sanai comes by asking if Kouichi is doing alright since Yukari's passing. He wonders how she knows about this, and she explains her brother is also in the same class and he told her. The two meet after his checkup and decide to have lunch nearby. During lunch, Sanai explains her brother seemed really scared of something, but also won't explain what's going on at their school, except that there are special circumstances, such as believing what happened to Yukari last week wasn't an accident. Kouichi only has more questions and asks if Sanai's brother has ever mentioned anything about a girl named May Misaki. She answers that her brother doesn't talk to her much, so she's never heard of May. Kouichi explains she's related to the girl named Misaki Fujioka, and that for some reason, everyone in class seems afraid of her, and they all claim she doesn't exist. Kouichi wonders if May, the incident from Yomi North of 26 years ago, and the death of Yukari are all related. Sanai is unsure, since she went to a different school during her junior high years, but she decides to help gather info by asking her brother. Then says they should both be careful around areas where unusual accidents occur. After lunch, on his way home, Kouichi runs into one of his classmates, who is playing hooky and pretending to be sick in order to skip class. She shows off her skills from the theater club. Then suddenly, an intense wind blows, causing heavy glass on the truck adjacent to them to fall over. Luckily, Kouichi reacted fast enough to push his classmate out of the way, and she breaks down screaming she doesn't want to die, knowing the impending doom of their cursed class. Sometime afterwards, Kouichi goes to visit May at the doll shop, and she makes her entrance from behind the doll that looks like her again. He asks her how the class has been since his time at the hospital, and she answers they're all terrified, as their classmates believe the classroom curse has begun. She tells him to be careful, and as he begins to ask what she means by that, a doll falls over behind him, and then we see she's disappeared. It's now Wednesday, June 3rd, and the students are talking amongst each other about Yukari's passing. The student council believes it is happening because Kouichi had broken the rules. Izumi blames herself for not explaining everything to Kouichi earlier, and wonders what they can do to save everyone from the tragedy about to occur. After class, Kouichi notices everyone avoiding eye contact with him, and he then meets with Naoya and Izumi, who refuse to tell him anything about what is happening. He suddenly gets a call from Nurse Sanai, who asks about Mei Misaki, and she explains that her brother refuses to acknowledge her existence, or that incident that happened 26 years ago. But then, as Sanai heads into the elevator, their reception becomes filled with static, and going down, the elevator's cables break, and the elevator plummets towards the ground. She gasps in panic. Then the elevator crashes with Kouichi hearing the horror event on the other side. Kouichi arrives at the hospital to see the scene of the incident that had taken Sanai's life away. He heads home depressed as he watches his father, who mourns daily over the loss of Koichi's mother. At school, Kouichi heads to the library to look at the junior high yearbook from 26 years ago. He eventually finds the class photo, and Chibiki-sensei asks which student was his mother. When Kouichi points at the photo, Chibiki recognizes her and learns from Kouichi that she died 15 years ago, right after he was born. Izumi comes to retrieve Kouichi, as their main teacher asks to send him to the faculty room, and then she bows, apologizing in advance, asking for forgiveness, but not elaborating on anything before walking away. In the faculty room, investigators are asking about Sanai's death. Since Kouichi was the last person to talk to her, they explain the cause is more than likely the elevator cables had become loose as the hospital building was old. But Kouichi couldn't help his mind wandering somewhere else. After the interrogation, Kouichi heads to class, only to find it completely empty. Kubodera-sensei appears to tell him class has been dismissed during the day. Kouichi then asks where all his classmates went, but Kubodera-sensei only responds that Kouichi must uphold classroom rules at all times before he walks away. After school, Kouichi asks Yuya and Ikuo to walk home with him. On the way home, he then asks them to explain what's going on. Yuya explains that all of Class 3 had a private conversation with Izumi, and that whatever is to come, Kouichi needs to endure for the survival of the class. Ikuo doesn't agree with Izumi's methods, however, and says he'll tell Kouichi everything he knows. Kouichi then asks him if May Misaki exists, and as Ikuo tries to answer, he suddenly suffers a heart attack and experiences a seizure on the ground in front of him. The next day in class, Izumi and Tomo are finishing an announcement, and Kouichi asks the student in front of them what's going on, only to be completely ignored. Kubodera-sensei then walks up to tell everyone to pray for the soul of Ikuo, who did in fact die yesterday. After class, Kouichi tries to talk to Yuya, only to be ignored. But it's not just Yuya, it's all the students ignoring him. During the next period, he gets up and leaves class, realizing Izumi had apologized earlier because their class was going to intentionally ignore his existence. After the last class for the day, Kouichi pulls out his textbook to find notes from inside his desk. He heads back to the doll shop to meet with Mei. He hands her the note, and it was left by Yuya telling Kouichi to have Mei explain everything. Then, we see the class roster with May Misaki crossed out. She learns of Ikuo's death, and how everyone has been treating Kouichi. Kouichi sighs in relief, knowing this is why everyone had been saying Mei hadn't existed the entire time, as he now knows for sure that she exists. He then learns that Mei lives here, and her mother is the doll artist for the shop. The two then head upstairs, and in Mei's apartment, she explains that since the incident from 26 years ago, Yomi North's Class 3 has always been drawn towards death, and when the incident begins, either a student or someone from their family will suddenly die once a month. This happens when the number of students in Class 3 increases by 1. Kouichi asks who the extra student is, but Mei shakes her head, as no one can ever figure out who the extra one is, and that 25 years ago, Class 3 experienced a phenomenon where they realized the classroom was short one desk, even though they had prepared one for every student, and that there was no point in checking the school records, as they had been altered, adding the name of this extra person. But this alteration wasn't done by any particular person. Legend has it that everyone's memories changed to include this extra student as well, and even though it sounds ridiculous, when this phenomenon would begin, both students and their immediate family members would die once a month for the whole school year. Kouichi wonders why people die just because an extra student appears. No one really knows, but Mei then explains this extra person is already dead, but they also have a physical body that is indiscernible from any regular person's body, and that this dead person has souls and memories, and they don't realize they're dead. May's theory is that incident from 26 years ago created a classroom that invites the dead. She then explains in response to this, Class 3 chooses representatives to create countermeasures to escape this calamity. They've tried all sorts of things, like moving to a different classroom, or changing Class 3 to Class C, but nothing would stop the inevitable deaths. Until about 10 years ago, they found a method to prevent the incident by pretending one person didn't exist to make up for the extra person, and thus, the class roster would return to the correct number of students. Later that evening, Kouichi asks why the students hadn't explained all of this to him earlier, if it was so important for him to ignore May's existence. And May replies that it was probably hard for them since these two had already spoken before their classmates had the chance to explain. We then learn the reason why she had the worn-out desk is because it's part of the rules to give it to the student whose existence is to be ignored. And then, May's mom comes in to make small talk. May decides to walk Kouichi out, and they talk about how May and her mother seem to have an estranged relationship. May believes that to her mother, she's just another doll. With her skipping school all the time, her mother never asks nor interferes. Kouichi asks how she deals with being non-existent, and May answers she would rather it be her than her having to ignore another student. In the park, May explains their classmates are probably desperate to make something work, since they're also ignoring Kouichi as well, and that even though there's no guarantees, it's sad to see people die. With the two done for the day, May then shows her prosthetic eye that her mother made for her so it could resonate a beauty like the doll's. She lost her eye when she was 4 years old due to a tumor, and thinks of that time as not so pleasant as she was near death. The two shake hands and she welcomes him to the non-existent club, June 8th. On another day of class, Kouichi slams his desk and begins to dance with May in front of everyone. However, we learned this was all just a daydream. Later on the roof, the two have lunch together, discussing art and various other topics. They spend time together at the river after school, and watch their classmates on the roof during PE. The two spend their free time together, as they're the only ones who can bond in the same situation. In the library, Kouichi shows May the class containing his mother. Chibiki-sensei comes in, and they learn he was the teacher during Koichi's mother's year. Chibiki-sensei then explains he's allowed to talk to them since he's not a part of Class 3, and that the only people in danger are students of Class 3 and their families within 2 degrees of separation, and that those particular family members must also be in Yomiyama. Chibiki-sensei then explains he remains at the school because he feels partially responsible for the events that happened 26 years ago when he acknowledged the dead Misaki. We learn the dead person from 26 years ago was actually Misaki Yomiyama, who was a boy who had died during a house fire, and that all the legends about him being a girl were just embellishments. He then hands Kouichi a book of all the class rosters since 1972, which is 26 years worth, and that everyone with an X next to their name died that year. Chibiki-sensei explains that for many years, making a student non-existent worked most of the time to stop the incident, and that there was really no way for them to tell who the extra student was, as the records would change to add the extra's name, and so would everyone's memories. But when the year ends and everyone graduates, the records revert back to their original state, and the extra reappears back in the roster list in their respective year they had truly died. But all of the memories the students have of them being the extra also become lost. Chibiki-sensei believes this whole incident is not a curse, but more like a natural occurrence like a typhoon or an earthquake, and that he has no idea if making two people non-existent will work, as there are no instances of the calamity stopping mid-year. The bell rings and Chibiki sees the two out. With school ending, he's saddened to learn Koichi's mother had died when she returned to Yomiyama to give birth to him. Back at home, Kouichi asks Reiko if his mother's death had something to do with the incident at school. She doesn't know, and his grandfather sobs, remarking the words, "Poor Ritsuko," who is Koichi's mother, and also "Poor Reiko," before they call it a night. It's Monday, July 13th at school, and Kubodera-sensei lays a bag on his desk before apologizing to everyone. He becomes erratic and offs himself in front of everyone, causing red to splash upon the students before he falls to his end. The students scream and many run out of the classroom from the horrific scene. Shibiki-sensei then comes in and tells Mikami-sensei to call the ambulance. Mei then tells Kouichi it's time to go, and that it looks like making two students not exist doesn't work. The two walk outside, getting glares from Izumi and the other classmates. Later, Shibiki-sensei tells Kouichi and Mei he felt troubled this morning when Kubodera-sensei had seemed a little off on their way into school. The investigators told him the reason for Kubodera's actions were probably due to the stress he felt from the calamity and trying to maintain peace in the classroom. He perhaps felt trapped and even offed his own sick, bedridden mother. But the biggest reason being, the Class 3 incident most likely compelled him to do all of this. Later, on the rooftop, Naoya tells them all the students are going to treat Kouichi and Mei like they exist again. Since the plan didn't work, Izumi comes and elbows Naoya and tells the other two the rest of the students will likely blame them for all this, and herself for being incompetent. She doesn't blame Kouichi, however, and decides she needs a new plan. They all then laugh because Naoya says something stupid. At the library, Shibiki-sensei says during Aunt Reiko's 9th grade year, they had gone on a class trip to the shrine on Yomiyama Mountain, and that something had happened during the trip to stop the calamity mid-year. On Friday, July 17th, Mikami-sensei explains Class 3 will have a school trip to the Yomiyama Shrine during August 8th through 10th, and that they must all prioritize it. But we can see she is shaken with fear. We then see Kouichi wandering the halls, and he sees Mei ask, "Who is dead?" And he sees all his classmates just staring at him in the hall. He enters the classroom, and they all look at him and their faces begin to melt. He bumps into Mei, and she tells him he's the dead one, causing him to scream in terror. But it was all just a dream. He then gets a call to meet up with Naoya, and heads to the cafe to meet with Izumi first. They have some coffee, and she asks him why she hasn't gone back to Tokyo. He refuses because it'd feel like he was running away. He then explains he's starting to wonder if he's the extra, and Izumi responds that it's possible. Maybe he was a stillborn baby that came back to life as a Class 3 transfer student, which is enough to shake him. But Izumi laughs, saying not to take her too seriously. She shakes his hand and mentions she still gets the feeling they've met before, so he can't possibly be the extra, and that the dead should have extremely cold hands. But his hands feel perfectly normal. And Naoya and Yuya arrive, and Izumi moves over. To avoid sitting next to Naoya, their server comes over, who is Yuya's older sister, and we learn she went to Yomi North as well, but she wasn't a part of Class 3. She explains to them one of their cafe regulars is a man named Katsumi. Katsumi was also a student who had gone to Yomi North, and one day, he broke down at their bar area because he was the one who stopped the incident during Aunt Reiko's year, and that he had left clues to the solution somewhere inside the school. The four then make a plan to track down Katsumi. Later, Kouichi asks Mei to join them tomorrow, but she has to be somewhere. She then decides to give him her phone number, and asks Kouichi if he still wonders if he's the dead extra. She runs over behind a curtain, and Kouichi finds her in a doll bed. She then opens her eyes and tells him not to worry, because he's not the one who is dead. Later that evening, Kouichi explains to Aunt Reiko that her classmate Katsumi mentioned he had stopped the incident during their year, but he apparently doesn't remember any of the details. She also doesn't remember what happened, but decides to help Kouichi and his friends get to him outside of town. The three friends arrive and include Takako and Junta, who gets carsick easily. As they drive, Reiko explains Katsumi is currently working at a resort hotel, and is thus the reason why they're going on a beach trip. They all sit nervously as a truck passes in front of them, and they breathe a sigh of relief now that they've made it out of Yomiyama since they can no longer die from the calamity. During the drive, Izumi tries to flirt with Kouichi, but it pretty much fails. He then asks about how she became their class rep for countermeasures, and she explains she nominated herself because she couldn't stand the idea of her friends dying, and is going to put an end to the incident. They arrive at the resort, but Katsumi is out at the moment. They all then decide to enjoy their time on the beach, and Kouichi finds Mei there as well. They break open and enjoy watermelon together, play in the water together, and everyone enjoys their time completely carefree, forgetting the terror they experienced back in Yomiyama. Kouichi then comes over to Mei and learns her family has a beach house nearby. He asks if they find out who the extra is, if it'll stop the calamity moving forward, but Mei thinks it won't do anything since it's already started. The two meet hands in the sand mound, and Kouichi tells her connecting every once in a while isn't so bad. The friends then decide to have a barbecue, and they compete to see who can collect the most edible things on the beach, where the losers who collect the least will have to do the cooking. They all collect various things, good and not so good. But overall, they don't collect enough meat to eat, and end in a draw. Luckily, Aunt Reiko picked up meat from the store, and they all enjoyed the barbecue on the beach. Katsumi arrives and remarks that Reiko is as careless as ever, since he tried calling her but she never picked up. He looks at her from bottom to top to say she's really grown. Then she replies he's grown as well, grown into a geezer that is, causing him to tell her to shut up. He then learns the students from Class 3 are here to learn about the summer trip from their year. The only thing he remembers is that someone had died during their trip on the mountain, but neither him nor Reiko can remember details from the trip. Kouichi then asks what Katsumi left for future Class 3 students to help them, and he explains it was a recording of some kind that he had left in the school. Then suddenly, an intense wind blows their beach ball away, and Junta swims out to retrieve it. He sinks in the water, giving everyone a scare, but comes out in waves. Naoya shouts at him to stop messing around, but as he swims further, he suddenly faints in the water, and a boat comes by and crushes him, leaving the water red, and everyone is left in terror, wondering why this had happened. They all mourn the loss of Junta with Chibiki-sensei. As they leave, Mei mentions that for some reason he wasn't swimming straight. Chibiki-sensei then realized he must have died before the boat hit him, as the police reported that his head position was inconsistent with where the boat collided. According to Junta's family, they had heard a loud noise from the stairway in the morning, and he had most likely hit his head, and suffered a brain hemorrhage he got that morning before they left, which means his death event still took place in Yomiyama. Later, we see Kouichi experiencing another nightmare, as he sees his dead friends bleeding out, and blaming him for their deaths. He wakes up relieved it wasn't real. The next day, Kouichi gets together with the boys to go find out what Katsumi had hidden to help Class 3. They end up in the art room to find Mei, who decides she wants to join them. They head to the entrance of the old building with a sign that says, "Do not enter." They head to the upstairs, and as they walk through the dilapidated halls, they eventually find the old Class 3. The class is covered in dust, and seems untouched for the last several years. Mei decides she wants some fresh air, and upon trying to open a window, glass falls before them, and the friends are all relieved she's unharmed. They continue their search, and Mei falls into a broken floorboard, causing a locker to fall and nearly crush Naoya. Kouichi then finally touches a supply closet, and inside, a small tape that reads, "To future students who are suffering from the disaster of Class 3. They then head to the old AV room and play the tape in a cassette player. They hear Katsumi speak as a student of Class 3 from 1983. He explains the events on the class trip to Yomiyama Shrine, where their teacher suggested they visit to lift a curse they were all experiencing. The shrine seemed unkempt, so they decided to clean up the grounds and then prayed, hoping the calamity was over. However, it certainly wasn't, as the clear skies suddenly turned overcast and began pouring rain with thunder. On their way down, a boy in front of him with an umbrella was zapped with lightning. Then in a panic, the students all started running down to get off the mountain as fast as possible. And another girl fell to her demise. As Katsumi is about to explain the important part, campus security checked into the AV room they weren't supposed to be in. While they had managed to avoid getting caught, they couldn't avoid Naoya being an idiot and messing up the tape. Yuya decides to take on the task of fixing the tape for them to listen to later. But while all this was happening, their classmate, Ayano, and her family's car gets a rock to the windshield, and they perish off the side of a cliff. At the same time, a crane machine crashes into the house of their classmate Atsushi and crushes her brother who stayed home to play video games. The next day, we see Izumi crying over the loss of her brother. She kicks a can and it hits someone. She runs down to apologize and trips down the hill, only to see the boy she hit was Kouichi, but she awakens and we learn it was a dream. Later, Class 3 arrives at Yomiyama Shrine, with only 19 students remaining. Yuya offers to take a class photo, and the students plus the teacher get together for the picture. However, no one really seems to smile in the photo. They are welcomed by their classmate Ikuo's grandparents, who was the boy who had passed away from the heart attack. In the boys' room, they decide to listen to the rest of the tape with Mei. In the tape, Katsumi explains he got into a fight with his classmate whose name constantly gets censored out. He eventually shoved the classmate over and was horrified to see him impaled by a tree branch. Katsumi then ran back to his room back at the lodge, unable to sleep, thinking someone would find their classmate's body and freak out. The following day, he headed back into the forest, only to find the body had disappeared without a trace. He tried asking his classmates what happened to the one he had killed, but they only looked at Katsumi like he was crazy and had no idea who he was talking about. They even said there were only 19 students on the trip, not the original 20. That's when he realized he saved them all by killing the extra, and they need to send them back to death where they belong. Upon hearing the solution, they all sat in silence. They remark how they never heard the classmate's name, which is proof this extra had been truly found and defeated. Kouichi wonders if they could truly kill another classmate. During dinner time, their classmate Daisuke starts to have an asthma attack. Chibiki-sensei tells someone to call an ambulance, but Iko's grandmother comes to tell them their phones haven't been working since yesterday, and it seems no one else's phones are working either. Chibiki-sensei then decides to drive Daisuke to the hospital, and they're left in the care of Mikami-sensei. Afterwards, Kouichi heads to Mei's room. He digs through a bin he brought from his house that belonged to his mother, and reveals the photo that contains Misaki Yomiyama from 26 years ago. Mei asks him if he knows which student Misaki is, and he remarks it's probably the strange boy that looks kind of blurry compared to the others. Mei then remarks how Koichi's mother and Aunt Reiko look alike. Kouichi then asks about Mei's mother, and we learn Mei's family situation is very complicated. It turns out, her cousin Misaki Fujioka, who had died earlier, was her twin sister, and Mei was adopted by her aunt into the Misaki family. As her aunt, now mother, Yukiyo was grief-stricken due to the loss of her stillborn child. All their classmates believe the calamity began a month later than it should have, with Yukari, who died from the umbrella in May, but in reality, it actually began on schedule in April with the death of Mei's twin sister, Misaki. Kouichi asks if this is why Mei knew he wasn't the extra, since he transferred into their class a month after the calamity began. And while this helped confirm his innocence, she reveals the real reason to be because her left eye can see the color of death. It's not a normal color like a red or blue, and it appears strongly on those who are dead and lightly on those with serious injuries or illnesses. She decided to keep her eye covered because she felt sick after seeing the death color around 1 day surrounding her twin sister, and mentions she could see the color very clearly in the color of Misaki Yomiyama. But she doesn't see the death color on Kouichi at all. Kouichi then asks if she knows who the extra is, and as she's about to reveal it, Naoya barges in, saying he might have done something bad. Over in Izumi's room, she mentions how in elementary school, there was a girl that looked like Mei with the same name, Misaki. Takako asks if that girl had an eye patch. Izumi says she didn't, and then comes to the conclusion that Mei must be the extra, because the Misaki she knew of never had an eye patch, but May Misaki had hers since she was 4 years old. We come back to Mei's room, where Naoya frantically asks if they remember their classmate Tomo. They both remember, and Naoya drops to the ground and reveals he tried to end him by throwing him over the balcony. He feels immense regret, and Kouichi tells him they should try to find Tomo. The three head downstairs, and Kouichi notices an open door. He decides to head towards it, but suddenly finds his leg grabbed by his classmate drenched in red. His classmates explained it was Ikuo's grandmother, and when Kouichi checks the dining hall, he sees the room on fire, and Ikuo's grandfather desecrated completely. Izumi comes out hearing Kouichi's screams, and he explains to all of them that Ikuo's grandmother has gone insane and might be on a murder spree. They then hear a scream upstairs from Takako, and they head up. They see Takako's room with red on the door and all over the sheets, and Izumi screams, asking where she's gone. Kouichi comes out of their room to find Yuya, who explains Tomo came to their room angry, and Yuya had explained the reason Naoya had pushed him over was because of the contents in the tape. The boys head back to their room to find both Tomo and the tape recorder missing. The boys then split up to search for Tomo and warn everyone about Ikuo's grandmother, who was trying to kill them all. Naoya and Yuya try heading to Mikami-sensei's room, only to find out she isn't there. They see a bloody trail and hope that it isn't hers. They then check another room, Lightning strikes, revealing Iko's grandmother with a butcher knife. Kouichi is in shock when he hears the screams of Yuya and Naoya, but there's no time to check, as Takako walks up with red all over her face. She says, "Thank goodness." And after looking at Mei, she screams the words, "Send the dead back to death." We turn back to the boys getting chased by Iko's grandmother. She narrowly misses Naoya's head, then gets rescued by Yuya shoving something into her. Then back to Takako, who gets shoved away by Kouichi before she can strike Mei. Takako knees him in the gut, but he still manages to take the dangerous object away. Being disarmed, she decides to leave, and Izumi explains they had also heard the contents of Katsumi's tape. Izumi decides to chase after Takako, but over the intercom, Takako plays the part of the Katsumi tape where he mentions they need to send the extra back to the afterlife. She then tells everyone the extra is May Misaki, because they had gone to the same elementary school together, but May's eye was still intact then, and rationalizes she had come back incomplete. She shouts it's time to end her, and the students come out to confront Mei. Mikami-sensei tells them to stop. However, she becomes a casualty because of an angry student. Kouichi punches the student, and then gets stopped by Mei. The two run away, and kick through one of the girls before locking themselves into room 203. The students break in, and we see Kouichi and Mei trying to escape into another room. Atsushi finds Mei with an insane look on her face. She goes in for a slice, but falls to an untimely end on the ground. In the entrance hall, two boys smell fire burning, and upon checking the dining hall, an explosion happens, frying the student to a crisp. Kouichi and Mei hide safely in the staircase, but it turns out not to be safe, as Takako appears to pierce Koichi's shoulder. She then stomps on his head and says she won't kill him because he isn't the extra, and then lunges towards Mei, who narrowly dodges. Takako then gets her neck caught by some wiring, and the ceiling falls. This causes the wiring to pull her up and suffocate her to a vicious end. Then, Izumi finds them, but loses her patience seeing Takako dead and a weapon in Mei's hand. This was the last straw for Izumi, and she tells Mei she's going to get her revenge. In this moment, Mei wonders if the extra was gone, would all the tragedies finally end? She then runs away, with the sound of Kouichi screaming her name. A room bursts into flames. The students make a run for it, and we see everyone trying to escape. Some of them make it to the entrance hall and get crushed by a chandelier. Another gets impaled in the back by Iko's grandmother, who is about to claim her next victim. Naoya and Yuya try to escape through a window, only for Yuya to get caught by the grandma. They fall outside and get rescued by Chibiki-sensei, who remarks this certainly isn't normal. We get a glimpse of a boy who survived the chandelier crashing. He tries to escape, but meets an unlucky end by a falling pillar. Then, Chibiki-sensei has the other two boys with him, and meets with a female student who survived. In the burning halls, another student runs into Kouichi, but meets her end with Tomo being the culprit. Tomo asks if Kouichi remembers her, and upon hearing that he does, Tomo just scoffs, saying he was wrong again. He then goes after Kouichi, because he still thinks the calamity began in May, the same month Kouichi transferred in. Kouichi dodges Tomo's assault, while trying to explain it all began in April, but to no avail, as Kouichi shoves him into a wall and stomps on him. Tomo screams, blaming Kouichi for Yukari's death, and as he goes for a final strike, he gets his head bashed by Izumi. She goes in to finish him off, but Shibiki-sensei stops her, saying classmates shouldn't be killing each other. She screams, saying the only ones who can fix this are those living in death's jaws. But Shibiki disarms her, and she runs away. They take Tomo outside, and Naoya comes to him, screaming out how helpless he feels from the loss of his childhood friend. Kouichi goes back inside to find Mei, and finds her face to face with Izumi. As Izumi approaches Mei, Kouichi tries to stop her. She shoves him off and makes an attempt at killing Mei. The floor they're on falls, and Mei tries to leave only to be caught and pulled down by Izumi. Izumi kicks her down and sits on top of her. As she holds Mei down for the finish, Kouichi pushes Izumi away. While grabbing her, he tells Izumi she's wrong about Mei. Izumi tears up and knocks him away. She shouts that she's only trying to protect them all, and then says if he's so desperate to die, he'll meet his end with Mei. Then suddenly, lightning strikes the building and glass flies at them. Izumi remembers again where she had first met Kouichi a few years ago, and we see her body encompassed in glass shards. Mei stares in horror as she sees the color of death all over Izumi. Kouichi then lays her down, and Izumi asks if he remembers a year and a half ago where she had kicked the can at his head. Kouichi shakes his head no, causing Izumi to smile, saying he's terrible for forgetting. Then, several explosions erupt around them all over the building, and Kouichi tries to search for Mei. He finally gets a phone signal and tries calling her. Mei answers, telling him she's in the backyard, but he shouldn't come after her because she's going to kill the extra, and he'll regret it if he does. Kouichi finds her anyway, and seeing hands under the tree in front of them, Kouichi tells Mei they have to help the stuck person. Mei looks at him and says they shouldn't, as she sees the color of death. She's known who the extra was for quite some time, but couldn't tell him for one reason. This reason being, under the tree is Mikami-sensei. We get flashbacks revealing Aunt Reiko has actually been Mikami-sensei the entire time, and she told Kouichi not to ever call her Reiko during school by mistake, in order to keep her work and personal life separate. At school, she was to be called Mikami-sensei because she was their assistant homeroom teacher. Mei then explains no other class has an assistant homeroom teacher, and that their class had the right number of desks. Yet, the calamity still began in April with her twin sister. Thus, it was the faculty room that was short one desk. Aunt Reiko pleads for her life, and Kouichi gets in front of her. He then says he'll do it, and grabs the pickaxe. He apologizes, but before he can swing, Aunt Reiko pleads again, causing Kouichi to second-guess himself, thinking he'll just have murdered his beloved aunt. Mei then explains a year and a half ago, across the river, she saw Reiko get murdered by an unknown assailant. Kouichi then flashes back to when Izumi mentioned they had met a year and a half ago. Then, when his grandfather mentioned poor Ritsuko and poor Reiko too, filled with sadness, all the logic unfortunately connected. Kouichi then prepares his swing and tells her goodbye before killing her and falling over, with his last thoughts being, "Goodbye, mother." We then see Mei praying at Mikami's grave. Kouichi walks over, and the two remark how none of the remaining students remember Mikami-sensei. Chibiki-sensei comes in to offer his respects, and then says he can't remember her, but hears that she was the extra this year. Kouichi confirms this. Chibiki heads out with peace now that the calamity has ended. Kouichi and Mei walk together, and he shows her the class photos. They're the only two left that can still see Reiko in them. They then sit on a park bench, and Kouichi hopes to never forget everything that happened. If you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more. Also, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.